Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Power Hour. It's the Heritage Corridor Business Alliance regular webinar and podcast series. My name is Dan Mulka. I'm the Executive Director of the HCBA. Today, we have Scott Zale from the Shulman Zale Legal Group. We're going to be talking about real estate transactions and why it's great to have an attorney on your side when you're buying or selling property. First, I get to introduce Scott Zale. Scott, tell us a little bit about yourself and your firm.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Dan, for having me, and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Scott Zale with Shulman Zale Legal Group. I am a partner with my partner, Jason Shulman. Our office is based out of Frankfort, Illinois. Our office focuses on real estate transactions and estate planning. Today, we are going to talk about understanding residential real estate transactions. Part of why we want to give this presentation is so some of the lay people out there will have a better understanding of what they're signing when they sign a contract, when they're first looking at a contract for the first time. Many people get contracts before they even talk to a lawyer. So we kind of want to give you a brief understanding of what you're signing and also kind of what to look out for, as well as who you should be contacting right away. And a brief overview of our firm. We are a fairly new firm. We started about 1.5 years ago. But my partner and I have over 20 combined years of real estate experience. So we took that knowledge and we opened up our own firm, and here we are today.
And I'm sure you guys have gone through a number of transactions where you've helped out, whether it's probably buying and selling both sides of the equation.
Absolutely. We help out buyers and sellers as well as new construction. We've helped out some HOA companies to deal with that. We help out new builds. I've represented construction companies. Pretty much anything to do with real estate, our company or our firm can handle. I've dealt with dividing lots to separate PIN numbers for tax purposes. Pretty much if you think of anything to do with real estate, our office can handle. And if it's something that our office can't handle for some reason, we know plenty of real estate attorneys in the area that we can work with to make sure that we accomplish the goals that you're seeking.
And by the way, Scott is actually a member of our board of directors here at the Heritage Corridor Business Alliance. So, we've worked with Scott in a number of ways, shaped and formed. He knows his stuff. So we're excited to learn more. And if you want to go ahead and start your presentation, go hit that button.
All right, sure, Dan. All right, can you see the screen, Dan?
We can, yes. And for those listening on the podcast, we'll actually make the presentation available on the web once we publish this.
And so again, my name is Scott Zale from Shulman Zale Legal Group, and I'm going to give a presentation on understanding residential real estate transactions. So first thing is where do I start? You have a contract, you're thinking about buying or selling a house. Where do you begin? Some people begin by going to their lender. Some people begin by contacting a real estate agent. Some people begin by looking at Zillow or Realtor.com. There's any number of ways that you can begin, but the key is to make sure that you have all your ducks in a row to make sure that you can have a successful transaction. So I kind of broke this slide down into two different sections. First, I want to talk about the buyers. You're a buyer interested in purchasing a new real estate property. Different things to think about when you're being a buyer as opposed to being a seller. A lot of common overlap, but the buyers are going to have more people in their ring with them, helping them conduct the transaction just because there's more involved. The sellers typically will have an agent and a real estate attorney. The buyers also have to think about getting someone to finance the loan, as well as having a realtor and a real estate attorney. So we'll start off with talking about buyers. First thing I think you should be doing when you're looking for a house is to get pre-approval for your loan if you need to finance it. So your first step should always be to figure out what you can afford. If you go online, there's all sorts of mortgage calculators that can give you a rough idea of what to expect for the total price. You can type in there's several, like I said, online real estate tools where you can type in the dollar amount that you want to spend. You can look up, if you know the area you're in, you can look up some houses, find out their address or PIN number, and find out what their taxes are going to be. You can see if there's HOAs involved in that kind of house. You can also estimate your insurance that you're going to be paying. You got to take all this into account to figure out what your total monthly payment's going to be for a house. Just because you have, let's say, for instance, a $300,000 house, it's not just you're paying $300,000 over the course of 30 years. You're paying taxes, you're paying insurance on that, you're paying HOA fees. You got to think about upkeep in the house. You also have to think about not all that money can just go into your house. You have all kinds of other expenses. So it's really important to get a grasp of what you can actually afford realistically. So my one point I made on here is just because you got approved for a $500,000 house doesn't mean you should purchase a $500,000 house. My partner and I used to work in a foreclosure law firm, and we saw plenty of people who did that. They got pre-approved for a $500,000 house, and unfortunately they lost it just because it was too much for them to pay for. They didn't really take into account all the other factors that go into the purchase price. As I wrote down here, you're still going to need to consider having money left over to pay for the cost of upkeep, expenses, utilities, HOA, putting money into a savings account, college fund, unexpected expenses, or even your vacation account. You still have to live. You don't want to be house poor. I know it's a really nice idea to have a beautiful, gorgeous house, but if you can't afford to do anything in it or do anything else, not really worth it. So really think about that when you're looking at what you can afford, and make sure that you're comfortable with that kind of payment, taking into account everything else.
And I totally can understand that. Within a month's time, I had to replace a water heater, oven, and had to have my dog had surgery. You got to have the money to have those things. So if you're wrapped up in paying for a $500,000 house, you don't want to leave yourself in a lurch.
Absolutely. And it's not just, I mean, like you said, you had both. You had personal expenses along with house expenses. You really need to consider the cost of living and the cost of your house expenses. It taken into account that just we call it PITI, which is principal, interest, taxes, and insurance. But there are so many other things that are involved in your house. Like for instance, lawn maintenance. Are you going to cut the grass yourself? Or are you going to hire someone to do it? Do you have, I mentioned this before, but an HOA? Those can be fairly expensive depending on where you're living. Sometimes they're very minor, but sometimes they could be several $100s a month just to live in that spot. So it's really important that you take that into consideration and think about that when you're looking into houses. So the next step, after you kind of get a ballpark idea of what you think you can afford, I think the next step is to go talk to a mortgage lender or broker, and they can give you a much better idea of what you can actually afford. Your lender will take your finances. They'll take your pay stubs, your W-2s, they'll take your tax forms. They'll run a credit report to see what your liabilities are versus what your income is, and give you a pre-approval letter. Now, same thing that I was talking about on that last slide about you doing that mortgage calculator. You have to take that pre-approval letter kind of with a grain of salt, because that pre-approval letter is going to tell you you can afford $1 million house. Well, in reality, you could probably afford a $500,000 house, or it might tell you can afford $350,000 when in reality, you really should only be buying something that's $200,000, just because those are going to kind of give you the maximum of what you can afford, not necessarily what you should be affording. One thing I do kind of always want to point out is once you get that pre-approval letter from your lender, don't buy anything. You can buy your groceries, you can pay for your medicine, you can buy, clothes if they get holes in them. Don't go buy that 70-inch TV. Don't go buy a new car. Don't buy new couches and furniture. I know it's exciting. You found a house you really like. You are just picturing everything you're going to put in there, but all those things that you purchase impact your credit score. So even though you got pre-approved, that lender is going to run your credit again just before closing. And guess what? If you made a whole bunch of purchases and your credit score sinks, you're probably not going to be able to fund that loan. You did all that work, you have money tied up into this thing, and it's not going to close. So just be aware that during the time from the moment you sign that contract to the day you close, I would highly, highly suggest not making any major purchases. Small things, fine. I don't have a dollar amount of what a major purchase would be, but think about things that aren't necessary as a major purchase.
Especially if you sign that contract now, go to somebody else's house to watch the Super Bowl. They probably have a big TV too. And then, you can host the party next year.
Exactly. You can bring the chips. That's not going to be a major expense. Bring the chips, bring the dip, but don't provide the TV.
You've never seen my house, but that's another story.
So my next slide is contact a real estate attorney. The reason I say that, and we're obviously I'm biased as a real estate attorney, but if you think about it, you have an agent who's bringing you to see these houses, right? You're going to see many houses and they're going to give you a contract. The agent can fill in the blanks on that contract, but they are legally disallowed from explaining to you the legal ramifications of that contract. So you're signing a legal document that in essence is tying you up to hundreds of thousands of dollars. We'll get into how you can get out of it later, but in reality, you are signing a multi-$100,000 contract without the advice of attorney. I wouldn't do that. Think about, would you go perform surgery on yourself without the assistance of a doctor? Or would you go start taking prescription pills without a doctor prescribing it? I would highly doubt it. So,
and no watching on YouTube either.
Yeah, YouTube's not a thing. I mean, it's a thing, but not for legal advice. So the reason I always suggest this is because lock up an attorney when you start. Because sometimes, and I've had plenty of realtors that we work closely with who will say, hey, Scott, I'm working with this client. They want to know what they can do for XYZ. For instance, a post-possession agreement is something that I see sometimes where the seller wants to live there after they sell the house for a time because for whatever reason, they aren't moving right away. So we have to work out some type of agreement in the contract or kind of understand the ramifications of it, of how the contract should read before that client signs it. Or, there's other things in the contract where there's miscellaneous provisions that you can put in that are legal. There's legal ramifications of putting those in, where the agent, while very, very knowledgeable in real estate and understanding the context of a real estate contract, cannot legally give you advice or tell you the ramifications of what you're signing. So that's why I always suggest contacting a lawyer first. You could contact us. We'll go at least have us ready to go on standby for when you do make that first offer and you have a contract. You say, hey, Scott or Jason, we want you to take a look at this. Are we okay to sign this? Can you explain to me what these terms mean? And that way you are more comfortable signing that first contract and putting in that offer, knowing what you're actually going to be getting yourself into. And my last point I have in here is for an attorney, I kind of pay attention on the closing statements to what other attorneys are charging, just to make sure that we are, right in the middle of where people are charging. So you can expect to pay a real estate attorney somewhere between $500 and $1,000 for a purchase of a home, usually less for a sell. But the reality is you're probably going to be spending about $500 at a minimum for the purchase of one. And that is typically collected at closing. So it's not anything you got to pay out of pocket at the beginning. Most lawyers actually, some will charge you a fee for canceling the contract, but most of the lawyers that I deal with, I shouldn't say most, some lawyers I deal with will only charge you if the deal goes through. So that's something to think about when you're looking for an attorney is what's your cancellation policy? If this deal doesn't go through, I want to know, what are you going to charge me?
So one of the things that kind of came to mind, just seeing that, $500 and $1,000 isn't a lot of money, but it seems like a good investment for a trained second eye to notice potential red flags in any agreement that comes up.
Oh, absolutely. And a lawyer isn't just looking at that initial contract, where throughout the the closing process. So when we get a contract, the first thing we do is we review it. We take a look at the contract, make sure that nothing is missed in the contract. Oftentimes, one of the things that we'll get to in a later slide is a tax proration. A lot of times, some of the agents I've seen, usually not the ones that I work with, who are very careful in what they do, but some of the other agents miss things. They leave things blank, and it's up to the lawyers to make sure that's filled in, because that could be a big deal later on. And sometimes I've even had lawyers where if it's blank, we end up battling for a week just on a simple term that could have been resolved had the agent put that in. So it's really important to make sure you have that first set of eyes going over things to make sure that all the blanks are filled in, that there's nothing missing. And we will talk about that in a little bit, the attorney review process that all attorneys go through. So it's not just, first we look at the contract, then we also look at title. Title is an important thing. We'll talk about that in a later slide, but the attorneys are involved in looking at title to make sure that you get clean title to the property. When it comes time to do inspection, the attorneys are involved in that. The inspector inspects your house, but then the attorneys go back and forth and try to resolve any issues that they have with the house. Try to negotiate either the seller fixing those issues or getting a credit for those issues. So the attorney is involved from the very beginning to the very end at closing, where we're explaining every single document that you're signing in that big stack of documents you're going to get. So it's really important to have a real estate attorney on your side. There are so many documents, so many things that you're signing, and it's a typical contract, a typical real estate deal is at least $100,000, and can be millions. It's not something that you really want to just take for granted and try to wing on yourself. Or wing by yourself. So I'll go ahead and move on to the next slide here. So after you have your real estate attorney, we obviously as attorneys, unless you have an attorney who is also an agent, we're not going to go out and show you houses. That's what you have a real estate agent for. I know some people like to look on Zillow or Redfin or whatever else it might be. You can do that, I suppose, but if you're a buyer, and we're still in the buyer section, get a real estate agent. The reason I say that is because you don't have to pay them a penny usually. The sellers are required to actually pay the commissions for both the selling agent and the listing agent. So those real estate agents, they're going to get paid, but you don't have to pay them. So why wouldn't you use one? And if you see something on Zillow or Redfin, send it to your agent. They can spend the time to walk you through their house, check it out. They are the ones who are usually going to draft up the initial contract and provide the template then to send to the attorney to review. They're also going to be involved in setting up inspections and getting the home warranty set up if you have one. They're going to be involved in the final walkthrough. There are so many different things that a real estate agent is going to do for you that it makes no sense to try to do it on your own. And I am going to take a moment to plug some of the agents that I know are also members in the Heritage Corridor Business Alliance, who I work very closely with and who I think are fantastic for reaching out to if you're looking to buy or sell. Jody Corey with Century 21 in Lockport, fantastic agent. Renee Sabin, Coldwell Banker in Lockport, another fantastic agent. And Patrick Mayer, Homer Glen, Coldwell Banker, along with Jonathan Darren in Homer Glen, Coldwell Banker. Patrick and Jonathan work in the same group, but all four of those agents, and that was in no particular order, fantastic to work with. I love working with all of them. It's important that you have an agent and an attorney who work well together, because there is so much going back and forth where the attorney is relying on the agent to do certain things and the agent's relying on the attorney to do certain things. You want to make sure that that agent and attorney have a good relationship. Otherwise, sometimes things get missed or fall apart. And if you miss deadlines, it's not a good thing when you're dealing with contracts in real estate, because many things are time sensitive. And we'll get to that in one of the next slides. But again, don't do it by yourself. There's no reason if you're purchasing a house to do it by yourself. If you're trying to do a for sale by owner, I can see that. you do technically usually cut out at least one real estate agent. I wouldn't recommend it, but people do it. We represent them and we're happy to represent them, but it's just a lot more on you. And usually, even if you're doing a for sale by owner, you still typically are going to end up paying for the selling agent's fee. The selling agent is the person who is showing a potential buyer your house. So even though you're doing a for sale by owner, meaning you don't have someone listing it for you, you still are likely going to pay some fees. And a typical agent fee for both the selling agent and listing agent is 5% of the purchase price. So keep that in the back of your mind. If you're selling a house, that is going to be an expense that you got to consider. Let's go on to the next slide. Oh, and one more thing that I didn't point out. We always recommend using a realtor instead of just someone who is just a real estate agent. There is a significant difference between a realtor and a real estate agent as far as licensure and what the expectations they have and ethical ramifications for a realtor as opposed to a real estate agent. Most people, I mean, real estate agents are licensed with the state, but realtors have to go above and beyond that and pay dues to become a realtor. It gives you more, they're more qualified than just a general real estate agent. So if you see that realtor logo, typically that means that agent is going to be more qualified. So all realtors are real estate agents, but not all real estate agents are realtors. So we'll go on to the next slide. Now this is where the fun legalese starts. So if you are in this general area, Chicagoland area, you are probably going to be signing a contract on the Multiboard Residential Real Estate Contract 7.0. It is a form that was drafted by a whole bunch of people who I wouldn't say are smarter than me, but probably smarter than me. They all got together in a group, agents, attorneys, everyone, put this thing together so that way the agents can just kind of fill in the blanks and they don't actually have to practice law while they're doing it. So the legal contract is already done. It's just now the agents can fill in the contract price. They can fill in some of the blanks that are there. So that way they can submit the offers, they can sign the contracts without actually having to be a licensed attorney. Makes the process go a whole lot smoother. And then at that point, once the contract's signed, then it's usually when the attorneys get involved. So the multi-board contract looks something like this. If you go online and just search for it, the multi-board contract, you'll see forms all over the place. They're very standard. They're 13 pages long, and it has all the things you could possibly think of to put into a real estate contract for the most part. Excuse me a second. And I'm going to go over some of the main portions of the multi-board contract that I think you should be aware of. Something I didn't add an extra slide for that I'm thinking of right now, though, that very first section, you'll see where it says the parties. Seems very self-explanatory, but I kind of want to point out something here. If you are an LLC or you're selling your deceased parent's estate, be careful that if you're doing this on your own or even your realtor, make it very specific. So if it's just John Doe and Jane Doe, that's simple. But if you're selling the property for your deceased parents, it's actually the estate of so-and-so, or you are John Doe for the estate of so-and-so. Or if it's an LLC, put the LLC down, not your name, because you're not the one who's selling it, the LLC is. So just kind of be careful what you put in there. The lawyers will fix it, and they should, but it's important to have that in there. I had one deal where I found out almost just before the closing that the seller wasn't an actual person, it was an LLC. And throughout the thing, they represented to me that it was an individual. Everything was based on an individual, but I found out at the end that it was an LLC. So we had to update title, we had to change all the contracts, we had to do everything over, we had to get a certificate of good standing. We had to get them approved by a title company, and we're all doing this 2 days before the closing. It was a nightmare. So please be careful what you put in the parties. Just make sure everyone understands who's actually selling this property and who's purchasing the property. The same goes for the purchaser. If you're an individual, and you're actually a corporation, don't put your name down, put the corporation down. So fixtures and personal property. I'm going to kind of go down the contract of the parts that I find are important. Fixtures and personal property are anything that is, fixtures are anything that's attached to the real property. So if you have something screwed in the wall, that's considered a fixture. Personal property is things that are removable but are going to stay with the house. Big examples: fridge, stove, microwave, dishwasher, oven. Those kind of things are personal property. And I took a clip of section 3, which talks about the personal property and fixtures. The reason I think this is kind of important is because you want to make sure that you and the seller, if you're the buyer, you and the seller have an understanding of what's coming with the property. Some people, if they're moving, they might take their fridge and dishwasher with them. But when you first walked through it, you saw the fridge and dishwasher and all that, and you thought you were getting a fully furnished house, when in reality, they might have something else in mind where they're taking all that with them. You want to make sure that you and the seller are on the same page with what's going to be included in the house. And then you also see in the lines just below all those check boxes is other items included and items not included. That's your opportunity to write in something else that's going to come with the property, or things that are specifically not coming with. So for example, we had a very, very, very heavy dining room table that the sellers didn't want to deal with. So they negotiated to include that with the purchase price, that the dining room table was staying there. There's no checkbox for a dining room table. So you add that in there just to make sure that everyone's on the same page.
Because when you walk into that new home and see that 150-inch TV, you want to either know that you're getting it or the seller's taking it.
Exactly.
I would say, important things first.
And even even if they're taking their TV, sometimes they'll leave the brackets there. You want to make sure that, say, hey, you got that 70-inch TV sitting there. Are the brackets staying? So I can put my 70-inch TV up there. These are just things that you don't think about when you're looking at a house, but it's important to understand and make sure that's negotiated for and contemplated when you're offering that purchase price. So for instance, if you have to furnish the whole, put appliances and the whole thing, you no longer are, you shouldn't be putting a $300,000 bid on a house that's worth $300,000 with the appliances. You should be taking some of that off and think about, I now have to put all these appliances in my property. Is it still worth the $300,000? Or should I go look at a different house?
And that's important, going back to, I think, your first slide where you were talking about, if you get pre-approved for $300,000, don't spend the $300,000 because you may have to buy a refrigerator, TV.
Exactly. It's really important just to understand where the money is going. A lot of people, we call it getting house poor. You don't want to get locked up in a mortgage payment and having to purchase all this stuff and not be able to afford anything else. So you got to really take into account all these different things and really understand what you're purchasing. The seller is required to make sure that all these fixtures and property are in operating condition. Operating condition just means that they work. So something we'll talk about later when we get to the attorney review and inspection is that just because it's old doesn't mean it's not operating. You could have a 20-year-old furnace, even though it sounds like a locomotive is running through your basement. If it's still operating and heats, it's considered working, and you really can't be asking for them to fix that. So something to keep in mind. And if you do find out that, if it's a 20-year-old house and all the appliances are original to the house, something you might be able to negotiate for is a home warranty. Typically, they're around $500, $600. You get a home warranty. And depending on the terms of that home warranty, they can cover some of those older appliances if they break down. So for example, you have everything's 20 years old in the house. You know that the furnace is got about 2 years left on it. If you're lucky, maybe even dies this year. You get a home warranty on it. You typically only pay that home warranty company $100 to come out and fix it. And if they can't fix it, they replace the whole thing. So if you can negotiate for that and the seller pays for it, that's, a good peace of mind. Say, okay, fine, we'll still move forward with it because I have this home warranty that'll cover me for the first year or two, depending on the terms. After that term expires, though, you do have to renew that home warranty. So it's not going to last indefinitely while you're living there. And that's down on line 35. There is an actual space on the contract to check if the home warranty applies. Attorney review. This is where the where we get paid all the big bucks for working on. So when you sign your contract after the acceptance date, you have 5 days. You have 5 days to complete attorney review and an inspection period. The attorney review period, and that's a really important date. And it's important because if you blow those deadlines, you technically waive the ability to then do attorney review or the inspection period. And you don't want to do that just in case there's mistakes, especially with the attorney review, but more importantly, the inspection period. That's you've blown the chance to ask the seller to fix anything or to ask for credits for things that are broken. So attorney review is paragraph 10 of the contract. The attorneys, once they get the contract, we have 5 days to approve the contract, disapprove the contract, or propose modifications. So the modifications typically are things like, what we do is, we know the contract's boilerplate, so there's not a ton of things to add on to, but sometimes we want to clarify things. So for instance, the tax proration. That was something I mentioned that I sometimes see not filled in. I want to make sure that my clients are getting their 105% tax proration. Whereas if it's left blank, there is no tax proration. Or if there's some type of post-possession agreement, we want to make sure those blanks are filled in. So it's really important that the attorney takes a look at it and catches any errors in it. They can also add things that aren't in typical contracts. For example, one of the things we ask for are that in the event of a breach of contract, the buyer is held only to his down payment of the earnest money. What that means is someone can sue you typically for a breach of contract under many different theories of the law. But if you agree that you're only liable for the earnest money, you're only out $2,000 to $3,000 as opposed to maybe being out $10,000 to $20,000 depending on the damages the seller incurred. So we try to add those things in there. It doesn't mean the other side has to agree to it, but those are the type of things that an attorney will propose to their side to see if they're willing to accept. So it's a very important part of the agreement where it can modify or catch errors in the drafting of the contract, just to make sure that you're not signing anything that can make you liable for things that you shouldn't be. And this is just kind of a summary of what I just talked about. And then after, so you have 5 days to submit your modifications, and then ultimately you have 10 days from the date of acceptance to come to a full agreement with the other side. So there are timelines, and there are strict timelines to keep in mind when you are, after you sign the contract. So the clock starts ticking. Kind of why I said early, get your attorney lined up right away. You don't want to be signing this contract, waiting several days, and then calling at the last minute and say, oh my gosh, my attorney review is due tomorrow. You might find someone right away, but you might not. So you don't want to be waiting till the last second to find an attorney. Have that person in your back pocket, talk to a couple of them. You know, the price of attorneys aren't necessarily a determining factor of how good they are. I mean, read some of the reviews, go online, check out their reviews, talk to other people in the community, see who they use. Just because someone's cheaper than the other doesn't mean that they're going to be a good attorney. And one thing I do kind of want to point out is people might see, oh, closings from $99. They're not $99. That is for the sale of a property, because attorneys on the sale of a property can make their fees in other ways. So if you're doing a purchase, you're not paying that attorney $99, so don't fall for that. Most of them are typically going to be between 500 and 1,000. Some might go lower to 400, but typically you're going to be around that area. If someone's offering to do it for 99, I highly doubt that's the actual fee that you're going to pay. So just keep that in mind when you're talking to an attorney and asking for quotes on their prices. And something else is, I know I'm kind of going on a tangent, but back to the prices is a standard purchase is going to be cheaper than, for instance, a new build or a new construction. There's a lot more involved in a new construction because the attorney is typically with you from the very beginning to the closing. So that attorney is negotiating with the contractor to change any of the forms of, it's not a standard contract. It's not the 7.0 contract. This is the contractor's contract. So there's items in there that aren't standard. So we need to negotiate with the contractor to modify their contract and make sure that you're meeting your deadlines and you're meeting your inspection deadlines and you're going through and making your punch lists and things like that, kind of running the quarterback of that show, just to make sure that everything is done timely. So those do cost a little bit more typically, just because there's a lot more involved. Same thing with for sale by owner. If we're representing you as a seller, for sale by owners are typically more expensive because the attorney kind of acts in the role as the agent and the attorney, because a lot of the things that we rely on the agents to do and that they do as part of their job, now that's on the attorney and the seller to actually step in and make sure those things get done. So going back, that $99 that some people advertise likely isn't $99. Just be cognizant of that. Inspection period. That's also something that is to be done in the first 5 days. So you have your attorney review and inspection period. The inspection period, you have 5 days to have a contract or an inspector go out and inspect the property that you plan on purchasing. The inspector's job is really to go in there and find everything wrong with the house. And as a home buyer, it's probably gonna be terrifying to see what is wrong with this house that you're about to purchase, especially as a first-time home buyer. First time looking at a house, like, oh my gosh, the electrical is wrong. The roof is going to go out. The furnace is blowing up. There's a chip here, a chip here. The electrical outlet isn't plugged in right. There's gonna be a lot of things. And that is your opportunity to ask the seller to repair some of those things, depending on the terms of your contract, or to offer a credit for those items. Something to keep in mind when you're looking at your inspection report after you get it is you are purchasing someone else's house. It's not going to be perfect. And it's probably going to be far from perfect. They lived in it. There's normal wear and tear that happens. They might have done things on their own, you know, some patching in the walls that don't look very professional, but don't really take away from the value of the house necessarily, or don't take away from the fact that it's still a structurally sound house. So the inspection period is really to ask for things that weren't visible when you did your original walkthrough of the house. So you're going through that house the first time, you don't know what's up on the roof. The inspector goes up there, it's like, hey, there's holes in the roof, or there's all kinds of damage. I walked through and this roof was spongy, or the gutters are backing up, which could cause flooding. The grading of the landscape is bad, which can cause flooding. Or they go in, they look in the basement and they say it looks like there was active flooding in the basement. There's mold here. Things that you as a layperson who's not regularly used to seeing these things are not going to catch. One of the biggest things they often catch are electrical issues. Some people double tack fuse boxes, basically meaning that the fuse box isn't set to code. They have too many wires going in and out of it. The sump pump might not work. The ejector pump might not work. They might not have GFCI outlets where they need to be, where there's running water. There's a lot of things that the inspector is going to find that you would not see as a layperson or someone who isn't used to real estate, or being an electrician or something like that, that you're not going to catch when you're running through the house for the first time, just thinking how beautiful it is. So that's where the inspection comes through. You have that 5-day window to have the inspector come out and then have your attorney send an inspection letter to the other side, at which point your attorney can ask for repairs to be done or can ask for credits for those things. Now, something we talked about in the beginning is if you're asking for repairs or credits, it has to be something that's actually faulty with the house. You can't ask them to replace a furnace just because it's old. And actually the contract specifically says, if you ask for something like that, the other side then has the ability to cancel the contract on you. So keep that in mind. Just because something old doesn't mean it doesn't work. And that's where you want to kind of negotiate for that home warranty in the beginning and see if you can get the sellers to give you one. At least they'll give you a year peace of mind for some of those things that are older.
And if you've watched any show on HGTV, you know there's always going to be something wrong with the house. It's every half hour there's something wrong and they have to fix it. And you see some of the prices that, you know, that they charge. So this is a very important time in the house buying process.
And absolutely. And it's something that when I have a new client come in and we talk about this, some people have bought several houses. They're like, yeah, Scott, I get it. I know what the deal is. But for like a new home buyer, you get this list and you're like, oh my gosh, I don't know what I'm going to do. There's so many things wrong with this house. I ask them to break it down for me. I say, I want you to give me a list of not three items, but 3 sections. I want you to look at that inspection report. What are your deal breakers? Is the roof in total disrepair where the inspector thinks you're going to have to replace that in a year or 2? Now, in that first 5 days, you can still cancel the contract. So if the roof is in total disrepair, you can still walk out. Asking for the seller to replace a roof, that's just not going to happen. So that's your time to look for deal breakers, or the foundation's crumbling, or if it's an older house and the electric is from 1930. Those are big things that you want to say, okay, this is potentially a deal breaker because this is going to cost me a lot of money. And I highly doubt the other side is actually going to repair this or give me enough credit to make it worth it. So that's the first section I ask. Then I say, give me items that you really, really want fixed, that are important to you. So for example, electrical, GFCI is a big one. The breakers. So they don't have the breakers or the outlets where they should be, or the proper installation of them. They might have regular outlets in there. Those are important things. You want to make sure you ask for those things. And I wouldn't necessarily call them a deal breaker, but you want to make sure they're addressed. Or for instance, we talked about double tap wires before in the fuse box. Important thing to ask for. You want to make sure it gets done. So we would include that in a letter. Other examples, sump pump's not working. You want to make sure that's addressed. And then there's things where the inspector found something, but with even just a tiny little bit of effort on your part, you could do it yourself. So for example, one of the things I often see is the drain pipe from the gutters are too close to the property. Go to Home Depot, buy a $5 extension, do it yourself. Sometimes they'll say the outlets aren't screwed in tight enough. Get a screwdriver, do it yourself. A lot of these things aren't worth it. Even if it's some electrical things, you might see some things that you're like, okay, I'd really like them to fix this, but if they say no, are you going to walk away from the deal? So kind of keep that in the back of your mind too, where when you're asking them to fix things, is this something that's going to cost you a lot of money to fix? Or is it going to be maybe a few $100s max after you move in to fix that up? And that also goes back to the very beginning. When you're thinking of how much you can afford, keep in mind, there's probably things that you're going to want to change right away. The painting, you might want to update cabinets. You might want to do new carpet. You might want to put new flooring in. So that $300,000 that you're approved for suddenly now is turning into $350,000, $360,000. So keep all that stuff in mind throughout the process. And that kind of comes into play in the inspection period, because now you're seeing things that are wrong with the house that you might need to repair on your own if they don't agree to give you a credit or repair it themselves. So we'll go on to the next slide. As is condition. There's a section in the contract that provides for as is condition. It's really what it says. You're taking the property as is. So what that usually does is you really technically shouldn't be asking for things in the inspection period to fix or to replace or asking for credits for things, because you're agreeing with the seller to take the property as is. Now, recently, that as is condition almost should be in quotes like it is in the paragraph, because it's really not as is. The reason I say that is because the trend now is to, if there's something that's health and safety related, we can ask for that to be fixed. So for instance, all those electrical issues I was talking about, I always put that in my inspection review, say, look, we found these things. Those are really important things that need to be addressed. Part of why we can get away with doing that is because if this deal falls through, on the next time, depending on what was disclosed to them, or if they got a copy of the report, they may have an obligation then to advise the next potential buyer that there are things wrong with the electrical. Or for instance, part of the inspection period is you can do a radon test. I suggest doing it. If you get it together with your inspection, it's usually maybe like $150, $200 more to add on to that. So it's kind of like a package deal, and it tests the level of radon in the house. Research what radon is. I'm not a scientist, I'm not an inspector, so I'm not going to tell you the benefits, or not the benefits, but the possible harmful effects of it. But it's not a good thing to have in your house if you have high levels of it. So if you do a radon inspection and it's above the standard of what the government says is okay, then you need to ask for remediation for that. And that's something that the sellers almost always, 95% of the time, are going to do. I've only had one who didn't, but offered a credit for the buyer to do it after closing. Part of why you do that is because if they find out that there's a high radon, they then have to potentially disclose that on the next deal if yours falls through. So they're going to fix the major things. So if something's seriously wrong with the electrical, or seriously wrong with the radon, or there's mold and they know about that, they're probably going to fix it, just because they might have the obligation, depending on how they found out about it or what it is, to disclose that the next time around. So that I kind of made a breakdown here. What does that mean? You can't ask for minor repairs. So if, don't go asking for an extension on the gutter if you're taking it as is. If there's something minorly wrong with, for instance, I don't know, trying to think of an example. There's a chip on one of the counters and you want them to repair that. You can't ask for that. You're taking it as is. You're taking it as it is on the day that you see it. Major things, like I put on here, electrical mold and radon, those are the things we're going to ask for. Health and safety. That could also potentially include asking for railings to be put in if they're not up to code. Anything that kind of teeters the line of health and safety, we usually ask for in the inspection period. Mortgage contingency, another big one. This is 5 days before closing or 45 days after acceptance. Your lender has to provide you with a clear to close. What that means is anytime after that clear to close, you can go to closing. So during the time from the moment that you accept the contract till closing, you are working with your lender possibly every single day to be submitting documents and making sure that everything's up to date. Now, we work with a lot of lenders. Some are better than others, but they're all going to be asking you for financials all the time. They're going to be asking you for letters of explanation for things. They're going to be asking you for your spouse's information. They're going to be asking you for someone who has given you gifts. They're going to ask you about your bank accounts. Well, what is this $1,000 deposit? Where did that come from? Write me a letter of explanation. It's a pain. I'm aware of it, but it's part of the process, and they're all required to do it. So no matter who you go with, you're going to have to go through this this process. And honestly, this is one of your only, as the buyer's, responsibility. The rest of the stuff is, a lot of it is on the attorney and the agent. So you making sure that you get your clear to close and your approval from your mortgage company is really on you. You have to, I can't submit your documents for you. I can follow up with them and say, where are we at? I can kind of remind you about it, but I don't have access to your taxes. I don't have access to your bank accounts. I don't have access to your pay stubs. All that stuff you have to do. So we really push on our clients to make sure that you are getting that done, because if the mortgage contingency isn't approved, your closing is going to get delayed or never happen. So something to keep in mind as we're going through it. You need to make sure that you are constantly on top of your mortgage contingency and making sure that you get that clear to close. Something I have in here is to get ahead of things. If you get a new pay stub, send it to your lender right away. If you get a new bank statement, send it to your lender. Don't wait for them to ask. I know most of the time people get, angry at their lenders because they're asking for the same thing. Who cares? Get it sent to them. It's not worth getting upset about with them, because you're only going to delay the process if you're not just complying with them. I don't want to say, be held ransom by your lender, but you got to make sure you're sending all those documents in and getting them in timely. So that way the process continually moves and you'll be able to clear your close on the time that you have set forth in the contract. Something else that we include in attorney review as a buyer's attorney, and sometimes the other side agrees to it, sometimes they don't, is that the appraisal has to equal the contract price or higher. The reason we say this is because if it doesn't appraise for the value of the house, your lender is not going to give you a loan. So you have the ability to, when that happens, if it appraises lower, sometimes your lender might say, bring in a few more $1,000s to the closing, or the seller might lower the purchase price and have the ability to do that. So something else to keep in mind is that your contract, even though, let's say, for instance, you're in a bidding war and you really, really want this house, but you bid $30,000 over, you better darn well hope that that thing appraises for $30,000 over, or you might have a contract that stalls out because the appraisal has to make sure that it equals the contract price.
And that probably was very common here when the housing market heated up, and probably still that way now. I haven't been in touch with it last few months.
Absolutely. We definitely had a couple of those where a lot of what ends up happening is it's a mix where the seller will lower the contract price a little bit, but then the client has to bring, maybe 5, 6, 7 grand to the closing table on top of what they're normally supposed to do to equal that contract price. So it is kind of important that even if you're in a bidding war with someone else, keep that in mind that property has to appraise. Otherwise, the lender is not going to give you approval. And that's just for a conventional loan. Now, if someone's seeking an FHA loan, that's government-backed loan. So there's a lot more hoops you got to jump through to get an FHA loan. Same thing with VA loans. And that's something you'd want to talk to your lender about to see what the specific requirements are. But for instance, an FHA loan, they do an inspection / appraisal of the house. So it's not just how much is this property worth. They actually go in and make sure that it's up to code. They want to make sure that it's safe for whoever's buying it, and that the lender is fully secured in what they're lending. For example, one of my partner's deals early on, FHA went in there and said, this fire door or this garage door doesn't have an automatic close function on it. To be honest, up until I started doing this, I didn't realize garage doors were required to have that. Apparently it's some code that they have now where you have to comply with it. So the seller and buyer each split the cost of a $500 door just to make sure that the FHA approved this property. So it's not just value, but it's also safety and health issues inside. Another one, there was paint on the floor of a basement, and they didn't know if it was lead or not. So they actually had to get someone come in who was an expert remediator to remove the paint just in case it had lead-based paint in it. So those are the kind of things that FHA is going to look for. And it was literally a splotch, like the size of a notebook. But it was something that the FHA inspector caught, and you got to make sure you're paying attention to that. So things to keep in mind if you're doing an FHA loan, there are more hoops to jump through, and it may cost you a little bit more to get things up to code. If the seller's not going to agree with it, you might have to be throwing in some of your own money on top of it. And once again, I'm going to continue to remind you about this throughout the entire transaction. Don't go buy that 72-inch TV before you move in, or the couches, or a new car.
It's always the TV.
I was able to copy and paste that, so that's why I have final walkthrough. If you have an agent, even if you don't, you can do this on your own. You're going to schedule a final walkthrough where you're just before closing, usually sometimes the day of, sometimes the day before. But the final walkthrough is for you to take a final last look at the house you're about to purchase, just to make sure there is no damage that has happened since you first walked through it to do the purchase, and also during the inspection. Mainly, for instance, you want to make sure that they didn't take some of their ceiling fans with, or they didn't take a door with, or they didn't put a hole in something. Also, keep an eye on your house is supposed to be in broom swept condition. Do they have other junk still in it? You want to make sure that if anything has changed or there's still stuff that needs to be done, talk to your lawyer about it so that we can get on the phone with the other lawyer, or talk to your agent about it and make sure they can get on the phone with the other agent to make sure that these issues are resolved prior to closing. What you don't want to have happen is you're at the closing table and we have all these unresolved things. Usually what happens is we do some type of escrow holdback at the closing table. If they have all their trash still in the property and it's going to cost you $1,500 to hire someone to come remove their trash, we hold back $1,500 for you to pay for the trash removal. So those are the importance of the walkthrough, is to make sure that nothing has changed, but also that it's in a good condition for you to take title to the property. Closing day. For anyone who's done a closing day or who has closed on a house before, you're familiar with how it works. It's long. There's a lot of documents, a lot of paperwork to go through. Your lawyer will go through every document with you and explain the importance of them. So it's not just, sign here, date here. We want to make sure that you understand what you're signing, because those are all very legally binding documents that most people have never seen before or don't understand. So we want to make sure that you are comfortable with what you're signing, and your lawyer can help you do that. So you already have a closing disclosure from your lender at this point, and you should have a preliminary master statement from the title company, which is going to list all the fees and charges and show you exactly the amount that you should be bringing to closing. Sometimes those are off. Things change. Sometimes the lawyers will catch something last minute, say, oh, we didn't put this charge in here, or the tax proration was miscalculated and things need to be adjusted. So I always ask my clients, if they have the ability to do so, bring an extra $1,000 or $5,000 to closing. Reason being is, if you're in the middle of the closing and something changes, something that we didn't catch earlier, the possibility of you getting out of the closing to a bank to get another cashier's check and bring it back probably aren't going to happen. I mean, sometimes we're doing these closings at 3 o'clock, and depending on how late it is in the process, some banks might be closed already. So always good to bring a little bit more to closing. The title company basically acts as a bank, where they will then give you money back at closing. So if you bring $5,000 more, they will just cut you a check right back for that $5,000 if we don't need it. So it's always safe to do it. I always ask my clients to do that just to make sure there's no issues. Now, if it's $50,000 or more that you're required to bring, you have to wire it. Otherwise, you can bring a certified check. So that the $1,000, $5,000 more, or $5,000 more goes to both the certified funds and the wiring. Get them to the title company. You're going to make out the check to the title company, or you're going to wire the money to the title company. Things to bring: your state ID, your passport, and your state ID or passport, some type of identification, and a checkbook. So even though if you don't wire more money, and there's like a $3 charge that someone forgot, title company will accept personal checks usually from you. So just bring a checkbook just in case. I've only used it once, but it's still good to have. Just bring it with you, please. Let's see. At the closing, unless there's a post-possession agreement, property will be delivered to you. which right after closing, you should be able to move in. That's how the contract reads. So yeah, after the closing, the property is officially yours. Let's see what the next slide is. Title. Title is a big part of what the attorneys do. It's a really boring part of what we do, but it's nonetheless a very important part of what you do. You want to make sure when you're purchasing a house that you are getting clean title to the property, that no one has a better right to the property. And that could be because, for example, somewhere down the chain of title, someone who was incompetent signed a deed, which makes that deed void. Arguably, everything then following that deed could potentially be void or have some implication as to how good of title you're getting. So the seller is required to give you a title policy, which protects you against those kind of things. You are required to purchase one for your lender if you have a lender. So why do I need title insurance? The way I best explain it to my clients is title insurance is a little bit different than other types of insurance. You might have auto or health insurance, which protects you for things that happen in the future. You get in a car accident, auto insurance kicks in. Health insurance, you know, broken arm, you gotta go to the doctor, they're gonna cover that. Title insurance protects you for things that happen in the past that we don't know about. So there is an official record that the attorneys and title companies look at, which we discover any type of encumbrances, liens, mortgages out there, other deeds that are out there that are unresolved, divorce proceedings. Those things are a public record that we're going to see when we do our title search. Title insurance covers you for things that are outside of those things. So for instance, the example that I explained, there was an incompetent person who signed a deed. You're not going to see that from looking at a title search. You're having no idea. You're just going to see a deed on the record that shows this was deeded from X to Z. But turns out later on, someone comes out and says, well, yeah, X, had Alzheimer's. He didn't know what he was doing. So someone might challenge that deed. And that's where title insurance comes in and helps you out.
I can imagine too, that could be 2 or 3 generations down the line. So
yeah,
it's almost protected. Yep, go ahead, sorry.
No, I was just gonna say there's some protections for you as far as like statute of limitations and things like that, but that's just kind of an example of what you could see. And this was what can affect title of the property. Forgery, someone who was incompetent, someone was underage, someone was under duress, they had to deed the property because someone had a gun pointed at their head, things like that. Anytime that a deed should not have been done, or there was some type of let's say, for instance, foreclosure proceeding, the foreclosing attorney didn't do their job and didn't catch all the liens that were out there and didn't properly extinguish them at the end. There was a judicial deed that was entered, but there's still now, because that wasn't done correctly, liens out there that now you're taking the property subject to that weren't caught. Those are the kind of things that title insurance will help cover for. Now this was all about the buyers. I want to switch briefly into sellers. Condition of real estate. You agree to leave the real estate in broom swept condition. We talked about that before. If you're selling the property, get your stuff out. We don't want to have the issue where we're trying to clean the property the last minute or having to leave things in escrow for to take away from the selling proceeds because you didn't clean your house. Prorations, something that we don't know if I talked about this before in specifics, but I mentioned it. Typically, you're going to be giving prorations for taxes and HOA. The taxes are, because taxes are based in arrears. So you pay your taxes for this year, next year. So the 2022 taxes won't be paid until 2023. But we don't know what that bill is going to be in 2023 because we haven't received it yet. So what we do is we take the last full tax bill that we can get our hands on and multiply that by 105%. That is going to be a credit the seller is going to give to you at closing. So that's one of those blanks that I make sure is filled in. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes, it's only valued at 100%, whereas the common practice is 105% because taxes typically always increase. And if you look at your tax bills, just about always goes up about 5%. So you want to make sure that you're getting a credit when the taxes come due. They're going to cover your taxes. The seller is responsible for the taxes for the entire time that they own the property. Same thing with HOA. Usually where that's going to come in is the HOA. You will have paid that as the seller already, so you might get a proration back. So you're also required to put in here if there are any HOAs. I just explained this. Prorations are basically the buyer and seller's responsibility for certain expenses, 105% for taxes. And then typical seller costs, just kind of a breakdown. This is just a random one that I put together for a purchase price of $280,000. So you're purchasing, as a seller, you're purchasing the house for $280,000. You have a remaining mortgage of approximately $140,000. You have a second mortgage on it for another $23,000. Now you got two brokers. You got the listing agent, selling agent. They got their commission coming up. Real estate taxes. You got your proration for the 1 year for $57.78, and then for this year for the few days that we had in January, from January 1st, January 10th, is $158.32. Title charges, the typical for this price for the owner's policy is $20.10. You're, depending on where you're at, you're going to have to pay municipal taxes. You're going to have to pay attorney fees, state transfer taxes fees. You're going to have to pay title charges, commitment update fee, county taxes. Sometimes the title company will assist us with getting stamps. There's another charge for that. More title charges. And you look at, from that $280,000 at the purchase price, you are now only recouping $90,472. So kind of keep that in mind when you're thinking about that. Something we do for our sellers and our agents is, if you want to have an idea of what you should list your property for, give us a call. We'll prepare it for free. Just give you, all we need to know is kind of an estimate of where your mortgage payoffs are, and we can punch all these numbers in, because taxes we can find, and the owner's policies and the title charges typically remain constant, so we know what those charges are going to be. That's the end of my presentation. I have my contact info here, along with my partner Jason's contact info. Anytime you want to reach out to us, we're happy to help you out. Consultations are always free. Give us a call. If it's something that's going to be in depth, I mean, we got to draw the line somewhere, but for the most part, consultations are free. And then for closings, you don't pay until you actually close. So if this is a closing deal, you don't have to pay us a penny until you actually close. I don't know if I have any more slides here. And then, yeah, my last slide is questions. And it's just you, Dan. Do you have any questions?
Well, no, this is actually very thorough, and I have to. No, thank you so much. And obviously, we're going to have the contact info, so you can easily, those listening and those watching can easily reach out to Scott or his partner if they have any questions. Thank you so much for taking the time for us today. I guess.
No, absolutely. Thank you for having us. And as I mentioned, we're on the attorney side, but if anyone's looking to buy or sell and you want some recommendations, reach out to us. We have them, whether it's agents, insurance companies, or lenders. We've worked with a lot, and we know who the good ones are, and we know who we can, like and trust. So people that work together good with us, or just good on their own, we have those recommendations. So feel free to reach out.
And as they mentioned, they have over 20 years of experience kind of in the real estate industry. So
Correct.
They know their stuff. So definitely reach out to either Scott or Jason. I was going to make a joke. I'll cut that out. I was like that. But no, so thank you for joining us. And thank you so much for tuning in to the HCBA Power Hour. Thank you, Scott. And then my name is Dan, and we'll see you again next week for another exciting edition hosted by yours truly. We'll be talking about social media for true beginners. So make sure you stay tuned for that. Once again, thank you, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, everyone.
And then I'll go ahead and stop the recording.